In this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this adorable pool party cake. Hi, it's Karolyn. If you want to learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, then I would love for you to join me by hitting subscribe and the bell. If you want to skip the intro and get right into the video, there are chapters linked below. So in this video, we're going to learn how to decorate this pool party cake. Totes adorbs. I really need to stop saying that. But it is so cute. And like always, I'm starting with my cakes already baked, filled, iced, and they are in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. And I have videos showing you how I bake, fill, ice, refrigerate cakes. All of that is going to be linked in the description, and any other tools that I use or videos that I reference will be listed in the description as well. And I will also let you know how much I charged for this cake. So let's get started.
Alright guys, I have Gum-Tex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all basically the same thing. This is mixed into all of this fondant that I'm going to use. It helps your fondant set a little harder and it makes it so much easier to work with. I only work with marshmallow fondant. I will link this in the description below. So I measured the circumference of the bottom tier and it was like 24 inches. So I have all these different colors of fondant that I'm rolling out into a log, flatten it down, sprinkle down some cornstarch. You want cornstarch, not powdered sugar. Powdered sugar will make everything sticky. Roll it wide because I want to cut 2 waves for each color, and then I'm rolling it long. And then make sure that it is long enough with my tape measure. Flatten it out with a fondant smoother. And I set all these colors aside, so I did like an ombre effect. And then I'm taking this little wheel cutter and I'm cutting a wavy squiggly line down the center of that, and I separated the 2 pieces. I'm smoothing out my cuts and I'm just trimming the bottom a little bit so I don't waste too much fondant. I got my cake out of the refrigerator. That icing is cold and solid. I'm not going to mess it up. I'm taking a wet paper towel and just cleaning that excess icing off the cake board, put a piece of non-slip pad underneath, and I'm trying to find the front of the cake, which looks most symmetrical, and mark the front. I'm dipping my paintbrush in some piping gel and I'm marking the very back of the cake. That's where I want my little waves to start and finish. And I'm just wiping piping gel all along the sides of the cake, and then I'm dipping my brush in some water so I can thin out that piping gel. I'm going to just clean up the bottom of the board again, and I am starting in the very back where I made that line, and I am making sure that this is sticking over the top of the cake. Where it meets in the back, I'm just cutting it with some scissors and press it together. And I'm just smoothing it out with my fingers, and then I'm getting a little bit of water on that bottom section of that fondant, and then sticking this next one down. So I'm overlapping it. The very bottom part is touching the buttercream, and then the upper part is touching that fondant that I just got wet, and then snip it in the back, push the seams together, and I'm pressing it down onto that buttercream, making sure that it's sealed. And I'm just going to repeat the process all the way down with all the colors. So I'm doing like a light to dark ombre effect. And once I get to the bottom, I have this dark blue one, and it is a little thicker so it can cover the entire bottom of the cake. And then I want to get water just down on that very bottom section, and that very bottom wave I cut really short. You know, it's not as tall, but I just wanted like a little wave towards the bottom of the cake. It just looks so much better that way. And just press it down, make sure it's adhered. And I'm just using my palette knife to make sure everything is in place. And you could pull the waves out with the tip of the palette knife to give it a nice little effect. And that looks good. Let's put that back in the fridge. Now I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. We're going to make a beach ball. So I printed this out the size that I want it to be. I measured the top of the cake and printed that out, made sure that it wasn't too big or too small. Now I rolled out all the colors really thin, and I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method on here. So I'm just tracing the red, and I'm going a little bit past where it is because I'm going to cut this to size. So once I trace it onto the fondant, I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and cut it out. And anytime I cut anything out of fondant, I'm going to take my time and use my fingers to smooth the cuts. And now I'm going to do this for the rest of the color. So I'm just going along those lines and tracing a little bit on the outside and cutting it out, smoothing my cuts. And you can see how it all fits together. Now I have a thinner piece of white fondant here, and I'm just putting this on the white fondant just to make sure that all the pieces are together, and then just getting some water on the back of each piece and sticking it down. making sure that the point is lined up and the outer edges don't have to be perfect because I'm going to cut it down to size. And now I found a little circle cutter that's about the size of that white part, and I'm just cutting through the colors, and I didn't want to cut that bottom part off, and using my X-Acto knife to remove it. And then I cut another little white circle, get some water down, and put that in the middle. Now I have these circle cutters, and I found one that's almost the right size. So do you see how I'm cutting it down to size? It just makes it so much easier to have the edges all perfect. And I'm smoothing my edges. And now I have a thicker piece of white fondant, and I'm going to put this on that. So I'm getting a little bit of water on the back and stick that down. And then I'm going to just cut that down. Now technically I could have just put this all on that thicker white fondant and not done the thin fondant, but I don't know why I did it that way, but whatever, it still worked. So now I'm smoothing out the edges. And now I want to do the same thing for the number using my trace, cut, and smooth method. So put the picture down on top of the fondant, trace it, and I'm using my Dresden tool to make a little line on the inside, just a little bit more detail than just to have it like a plain number 1. Cut it out, smooth my cuts, and then get a little bit of water on the back and stick that down on the ball. Good, now I want to get a skewer in the bottom, and I'm going to twist it in. Don't jab it in because you don't want to distort this, so I'm just twisting it, and I'm holding it, making sure that this is not poking out through the front or the back. That's why I rolled that fondant out a little thick, and let's set that aside to dry. Now I'm going to make the sun. I have thicker yellow fondant and thinner yellow fondant, and I found a circle cutter that's about the size of that, and I want to have a rounded cut, so I'm doing a tight piece of plastic on the top and pressing that down just to get that slightly rounded look. And then I'm going to do the same thing, just tracing the sun onto that yellow fondant. And since this is thicker fondant, I'm going to do a shallow cut before I cut the entire thing out. So I'm just sticking the tip of my knife into the fondant to create a line that I'm going to use as a guide. And once I have that done, I'm sticking the knife all the way down to the cutting board and cutting this out. And you can see how gross and jagged this is. So what I like to do, flip it over, use my fingers, use my tools to smooth it out, and then I'll flip it over and smooth it out from the front side. Get a little bit of water behind that yellow piece and stick that down. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the sunglasses. Guys, you know this method, trace, cut, and smooth. This is how I make all my decorations. So I'm tracing that onto the green fondant. I'm cutting it out, smoothing my cuts, and I'm doing the same thing for the black lenses. Get a little bit of water behind the back and stick it down. Now I cut a little white circle out of fondant, use a bigger circle to cut the curve for the smile and stick that down, and let's realign him on the picture and set him aside. Now let's make the raft. I'm tracing on the outside of the orange piece because I'm going to cut a thinner orange piece and stick that down. And I'm doing this on a thicker yellow piece of fondant. Make sure you trace all the inner details as well. And I'm using my Dresden tool to deepen the details before I cut it out. Now again, this is thicker fondant, so I'm using the tip of my X-Acto knife to create a line, and I'm always going to cut out the center pieces first and smooth them out before I cut the rest of it out. Trust me, it's just so much easier to do it that way. Flip it over, smooth it from the back, smooth it from the front. Now I have thinner orange fondant, and I'm tracing all these orange details on there, and we'll cut them out. Good, I'm placing them on there to make sure they fit, get a little bit of water behind it, use my tools to get them in place. And now I'm using a piping tip to cut out the eye, and I use like a number 4 tip to cut out that little detail in there. And that looks good. Let's set him aside. Now let's make the splash. Same thing, trace, cut, and smooth. So I'm tracing this onto that blue fondant. Cutting it out, smoothing my cuts. And now I'm making the letters of the name. So I'm going to do each letter a different color. And I'm just using the fondant that I already have rolled out. When you're cutting out letters, make sure you cut the inner pieces first and smooth them before you cut the rest of them out. And I want to put these on a black background. So I'm getting water behind each letter, sticking it down. And then I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and cut an even black border around the entire thing. And now I'm using my Dresden tool to add these little details in the edges of the splash. Realign that on the picture and set that aside. Now I'm making the pool noodles. Roll this fondant into a log. And I want to try to make them an even thickness for all of them. So I have a little cutting board and I'm going to set these all on the cutting board. So I'm gently rolling this out. I'm not pushing down too hard with my fingertips because I don't want my fingers to make marks in the fondant. So I'm being really gentle with it. And I put that next to the orange one and it was still too thick, so I rolled it out a little bit thinner and I need a bigger cutting board for this. So let's set these on there, and I'm doing that for all 6 of the rainbow colors, and let's set those aside. Now let's stack this. I got that out of the fridge. I'm using my sewing ruler to measure how tall the straws have to be. Take a marker and mark just on the outside and cut that marker off. And I'm going to put the straws in the cake, get some buttercream down. And I am washing my hands before I handle any of these cakes. I'm constantly washing my hands. You don't see me do it all the time, but I do. And I'm going to put this on top. I have a tutorial where I go into detail on how I stack cakes, and I'm going to link that in the description for you. So I'm cutting the dowel to size, countersinking the dowel into the cake board, cover that hole with some buttercream. Beautiful. Now I want no seam on this top tier. I have an icing bag with a tip number 4, and I'm just piping like a little thin line of buttercream, scrape off the excess, and I'm dipping that spatula under hot water and rinsing off that extra icing, and then coming back and like just pressing that onto the cake to make it a perfect buttercream seam, no seam, if that makes any sense. But that way I don't have to put a border on that bottom tier. Now let's decorate this cake. I'm going to stick a toothpick in the bottom next to the skewer. That way it's not going to twist when it's in the top of the cake. Get some icing underneath where it's going to touch the cake and stick that down. Good. Now I'm going to get some piping gel on the edges of the splash. I use piping gel and or icing and many different things to adhere decorations to cakes. I feel like icing has a stronger bond when you stick it to icing, so I like to use the icing in the middle and just make sure that's center and press that down onto the cake. And get some piping gel or water or whatever behind the name and stick that down. Now I want to see where this duck is going to stick onto the cake. I let that duck dry flat. I just think it looks better sometimes when the decorations are flat. So I'm getting a little bit of icing behind him where he's going to touch those fondant waves and pressing that down. Don't put too much icing behind there because it's going to seep out, just enough to make it stick. I'm just using a paintbrush, a dry brush, to remove any of that cornstarch. Now I wanted to put the sun there, but he's too big. He's not going to fit. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm trying to move the splash down, see if I can make a little room for him. And oh geez, this isn't going to work the way that I thought it would. So I need to find where's the best place for him. I think he needs to go on the right side. So I want to move the ball to the left side of the cake. I got a little bit more icing underneath the ball and stick that down. And I'm just using a spatula to remove the excess icing. And then I want to patch that little hole there as well. All right, so that sun still is not going to fit there, so I have to figure out what I'm going to do with this. I think it's going to look better on the bottom tier, so I'm paying attention to where it's going to be touching the cake. Now I have 2 toothpicks. This is a heavier piece, so I need to make sure that this is going to not fall off of the cake. So I'm anchoring those toothpicks down into the cake, not straight. I want to hook them down like a picture hook, so it's going to hang on the toothpicks. I'm making a mental note of where they are going to stick into the cake. I'm removing that sun and pushing the toothpicks into the cake so I don't push the toothpicks through the front of the sun. I hope that makes sense. I'm getting some icing behind it where I can still see the holes, and I'm going to hook these down. Do you see how by putting those toothpicks down into the cake, that thing ain't going to fall off there at all? It's like hanging a picture, basically. So I'm just taking a paintbrush and removing any icing that I can see, and there we go, it's on there. Now I'm going to push that splash up a little bit while I still can, and I'm going to cut these pool noodles to size. So I'm cutting it, and then I'm going to take my little ball tool and create little holes on either side. Good, now I want all these to be the same size, so I'm just holding the one that I did up against the other ones and cutting these all to size, and then I'm going to take that little ball tool and make little holes in the edges and just re-roll that out if it gets a little distorted on the ends. Now I need to figure out where am I putting these pool noodles on the cake. I can't crisscross it. I don't think it'll stay. So I'm just like holding some vertical, holding some, like curving some at the bottom, you know, just placing them down first to see if I like them. Okay, that's going to touch the side of the cake. I'm getting a little icing behind it and a toothpick underneath it and sticking that down. And I'm going to do the same thing for the yellow one. And sticking those ones on the top as well. And I wanted the blue on the inside and then the orange on the outside. I just like to have a nice color distribution. Use a dry paintbrush to remove any excess icing that you can see seeping out. And then I didn't like the red one there. So I'm gonna put the red one down on the bottom and put the green one up there. So I know I'm being a little extra, but that's my process. So I'm making the splashes. Now I'm alternating blue and white fondant. And then I'm going to kind of mix it together, but not completely, just so there's a nice little marbling effect. Rip off a piece, roll it in a ball, and then I'm rolling the bottom part to a point, and then curving the point in a little bit and setting that down. And I'm going to keep doing that with different sizes to get different variations in the splashes. So again, you want to roll it into a little ball, and then roll one end into a point, and then curve the end. And that looks good. Let's set those aside. Now I want to wrap the cake drum with some ribbon, and I'm just flattening that foil against the side, get some glue around the edge and on the back of that ribbon, and then where it overlaps, get a little bit more glue down and stick that down, and then just press it down one more time for good measure. And I want to put wires in the cake. So I have a video showing you how I do this. I'm cutting a straw and countersinking the straw. And then I have this 18 gauge wire and I have some snips and I'm going to cut these wires and I'm only doing 3 and I'm kind of flattening them out because they have a curve to them. And I'm sticking all 3 down into that straw. And then I'm going to cut them to size. Getting a little bit of piping gel on each tip of the wire, and then I'm sliding a little water droplet on each of the wires. I'm going to fill the hole with a little bit of buttercream and then take a paintbrush and just smooth that out. Beautiful, safe way to put wires in your cakes. Now I ripped a toothpick in half and I'm sticking half of that in that back of that splash. And again, I'm pushing the toothpick in and then getting some piping gel behind the back. So these heavier ones need a toothpick so they don't fall off the side of the cake. These lighter ones, they don't. I'm just using a little bit of piping gel behind it. So if they stand on their own, I'm getting a little bit of piping gel and a toothpick behind it, and I'm anchoring it down into the cake. You see how it's not going to fall off that way. And then you let people know that you have toothpicks behind these pieces. And that time I decided to use a little bit of icing. So you can use water, you can use piping gel, icing, whatever works for you. And there is the cake, so cute.
So there you go. How cute is this cake? I just want to go over a couple things with you guys. First off, I originally thought I wanted the sun up on the top tier with the name, and then it didn't fit. And it just didn't look right. And you saw how I kind of moved it around. So that happens a lot where I have an idea in my head and I make the decorations and then I'm like, I don't like it here. So I just kind of hold it up and figure out where it looks best and then I put it there. The next thing is I know I can get a little extra with my color balance, but I don't like to have so much of the same color together. And that's why it drove me a little crazy that that little rubber ducky and the sun and the rubber ducky were both yellow and they were together on the same tier. But that's why I try to mix the pool noodles around just to have a nice distribution of color. Now, a lot of people ask me, how do I come up with my designs? That's one of the most asked questions that I get. I'm really trying to figure out how to relay that information to you and really teach you guys how to do that. So stay tuned. Hopefully I'll be able to put something together for you guys in the near future. Now this cake, the top tier is 5 inches torted and the bottom tier is 7 inches torted, and it feeds about 25 to 30 people. What would you charge if you made something like this? Well, I'll let you know what I charged. This cake was $360. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave them in the comments below. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you are enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is pinned in the comments below. And you can keep in touch on socials and check out my website. Everything is listed in the description. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next. And hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.